So welcome back after the lunch break. We have two exciting speakers and a great topic that I hope will keep us awake after lunch. So in this panel, we want to do three things. First, to discuss the situation in Ukraine and the Middle East. Then reflect a little bit on international law, what role it has or has not played in these conflicts and beyond. And then maybe extract some trends from Ukraine and the Middle East that help us think about shifts in the global order and multilateralism more generally. So I'll begin with two more general questions to both panelists, and please take them in the direction you want to take them. So drawing on your work, your expertise, can you tell us how you evaluate the current international security situation at large? And then more specifically, if you could tell us what you think the perceptions of international law and international institutions are in 2025. Do people still look to international law and institutions with hope, or is there a sense that they have somehow failed? So maybe Comfort, if you could get us started.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be at the conference and also to be with you as well. And it's our first interaction, but I know that you are familiar with our work, and we're very much familiar with what you're doing. An evaluation of where we are today, the world was changing already. But it's accelerated in a direction that I think a number of people has left a number of people even more concerned. The guardrails were already going in the wrong directions. The guardrails that would often constrain bad behavior, the guardrails that would oftentimes you could use as levers to prevent leaders from abusing and misusing the international law and tools. And of course, at the heart, the center of gravity, key institutions like the UN themselves are increasingly looking weaker and fragile, and a number of question marks about their viability going forward as well. And of course, when one of the chief architects of the institutions and of the tools and the rules is able to bend it to his or her own will and challenge the essence of the rules-based law, then you begin to wonder what the direction is of international relations as well. So it's a worrying time, and also at the same time, you're seeing wars rising. You've seen a willingness to use the worst kind of instruments against civilians. So more civilian casualty, more human cost to war, more humanitarian catastrophe. 59 wars, for example, that we counted last year since the end of the Second World War. So the picture looks pretty grim and pretty horrible. When we said at the start of the year that we described 2025 as the year of lawlessness, this is precisely why we said it, because of what we're seeing now in Gaza and what we're seeing in Ukraine, what we're seeing in Myanmar, what we're seeing in Sudan. It's also a year that we characterize as a paradigm shift in terms of what we understood as international relations, as the Western rules-based order. And it's also the year that we saw that the human cost of war was going to go in entirely the wrong direction as well. So there's no good news, and the institutions that you would hope would be a check on the worst excesses of leaders themselves are pretty fragile. Questions about their legitimacy, questions about their viability, and whether leaders are interested in working within the realms of multilateralism, of international cooperation as well. There are some who are still interested, but when even the chamber of international peace and security is increasingly marginalizing itself from the worst excesses, then you begin to wonder what the fate is of international multilateralism going forward as well.
I'm not going to disagree with any of that. You asked us the question in the context of our particular work and activities, and of course my geography is the 46 countries of the Council of Europe, and my focus is human rights. And the link, of course, between my work on human rights and security, which is a dominant issue in this conference, is my firm belief that human security contributes to stronger national and societal security, a security in which citizens have trust in their governments and all else that follows. And from that particular point of view, I've rarely seen things worse in my lifetime. Comfort, you and I were discussing how I first encountered ICG back at the time of the wars in the former Yugoslavia. So I've been at it that long, and I've never seen it more worrying than at present, because it's everything you say, but it's what lies behind it. There's always been monstrous human rights abuse, but today there's monstrous human rights abuse, including a vicious war of aggression very close to here, which I'd like us to come back to. But beyond that, there's something in the last year in particular, which is the centre not holding as firm as it used to. Otherwise democratic, reasonable governments choosing from human rights like an a la carte menu. I'm thinking of our behaviour, the behaviour of a number of governments on the Belarus border, for instance. This particularly worries me because this is the centre, and as I quoted in another meeting this morning, forgive me for repetition, the Irish poet William Butler Yeats said, when the centre cannot hold, things fall apart. And so this is what adds to my sense of concern right now. As regards institutions, I'm a born and bred multilateralist. I've spent much of my life working in multilateral contexts. I've seen how frustrating multilateralism is, how slow good outcomes are, but how there's no plan B, there's no alternative. You've got to invest the time in the talking in order to produce useful outcomes. I've seen good multilateral outcomes in this very room, attending OSCE human dimension meetings down through the years. And it's in trouble right now. As Comfort said, the UN is, well, everybody knows, with the impasse in the Security Council, so much that the UN should and could be doing for us isn't the case right now. The UN should be at the heart of the story of supporting a path to peace in Ukraine. It's not the case for reasons we all know, and that's very unfortunate and very dangerous. My own organisation, the Council of Europe, is it's a doughty organisation. It's been around a long time. It's the champion of human rights, democracy, rule of law on the continent. It's produced an awful lot, and yet it's remarkably underknown and underappreciated. And so it needs to wake itself up, and we need to wake up to its role in our societies. I'm encouraged. I see there's a new Secretary General of the Council of Europe, and I'm very encouraged by the leadership he's showing. But we have to be very vigilant, because as I think I said a moment ago, if we lose multilateral spaces in order to build a just and fair world, there is no alternative. There's no other way to achieve it, as we see from the way so-called peace initiatives are unfolding with regard to Ukraine right now.
Okay, thank you both. I think you've already mentioned a number of crises, challenges, and some of them we'll come back to. But before we pivot to more specific questions, a general question to you both. What would you say is the most pressing challenge today? And more specifically for Europe, what should Europe be paying attention to, both in its neighborhood and maybe farther afield? So, Michael, maybe if you could go first.
Okay, again, I'll come back to Ukraine first. Ukraine is the existential challenge to human rights on this continent. It's not just a brutal aggression with the most appalling treatment of civilians on the part of Russia. It's not just about the fate of a single country. It is, of course, the fate of all the other countries surrounding Russia and what might happen to them next. But beyond that, again, this is a battle with our values. It's a battle with the rule of law state, with everything that we have so carefully constructed since the Second World War. And if Putin were to win this battle, then I feel we are, if not, I don't know if we're fatally flawed, we're profoundly damaged in our quest for a world in which, to use the words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone is free and equal in dignity and in rights. So Ukraine is existential. But there are Another great crisis right now, and again, my mandate is only in Europe, in the 46 countries, but I'm looking with horror at what's happening in Gaza. And I'm looking at it because of its impact within the Council of Europe member states. And by the way, that's not for me to suggest that I don't have acute pain for the suffering of people in that region. But I'm looking in particular in Europe at the rise of anti-Semitism, at the rise of anti-Muslim hatred, both of which are directly fueled by the conflict that's going on in the Middle East. I'm looking at the enormous ethical and human rights and indeed legal issues that arise for our member states in terms of arms transfers. It is simply illegal to transfer arms in a context of violation of international law. I'm even looking now increasingly at the use of our skies. And the extent to which we are facilitating the transport of machinery and weaponry, which will result in death in violation of international law. So that's a second great crisis. And I'll mention just one more, because there's really rather a lot of them. Artificial intelligence. Not AI per se, but getting effective oversight in place. We have reached that moment when we've reached that dystopian moment. The one we spoke of for years as coming in the future, coming in the future. Well, it's here now. With AGI and ASI, we're at the moment where we have to see how we manage that science fiction almost AI that was described to us over the years. We can get it right, but we have to speed up, and we have to make sure we do it before the first disaster.
Comfort?
Again, it's like talking to like-minded friends on the podium as well. So I'm going to agree with everything that you said, and I'm very glad that you broadened the geography of concerns of Europe beyond Ukraine and Gaza. I think the third one that I would ask, because I think we also need to look at the southern border of Europe, and I would say Sudan, and I would say the Sahel as well. And these are two areas where the EU for a long time was a pen holder on the Sudan file with the United States as well. And so the other atrocity, the other place where you're seeing mass violence, the other place where you're seeing the humanitarian catastrophe, the other place where you're seeing states being able to decide the fate of a country in a very horrible way is Sudan as well. 20 years ago, the other big international crisis was Save Darfur. And we don't have the same intensity concern about what is happening there. And you know, we talk about mass starvation and near famine proportion. You can see it in Sudan. The other place also is the Sahel as well, and where the European Union invested about 8 years at a member state level and also at an institution level. And I think the big concern today is whether the EU abandons and creates a vacuum because it's concerned of the presence of Russia. And in fact, it would be a mistake and an indictment on Europe's own international peace and security architecture if it was to turn its back on the Sahel as well. So if you want to be a responsible actor, and if you are very concerned about the rules-based international order, to turn your back against two places where you do have significant influence and leverage, that would be a mistake. So I would add that to the priorities I think Europe should be concerned about. But you're right about Ukraine. I would say underpinning this, the one lesson or the one instructive thing I think Europe should now understand is that it begins to define for itself in more practical sense what strategic autonomy looks like, because the age of dependence on your transatlantic alliance is surely up for grabs. It's not as steady as it goes in the same way. If we didn't believe President Trump the first time round, I think we take him seriously this time round. That your capability, your diplomatic heft, your military heft as well is also contingent on the strategic autonomy that you build for yourself, and a Europe that doesn't have that ability to shore up itself beyond its diplomacy would be part of the jigsaw that makes it very difficult for it to have any leverage in Ukraine or the Middle East or anywhere else as well.
May I add to that? On strategic autonomy, what is it that would make, what should the autonomous strategy look like for Europe? We're not unique in the world. We're not the only region that deeply embeds values and human rights, but human rights and values are deeply embedded in the story of our Europe, the modern story. And I think it's critical to embed these at the heart of whatever strategic autonomy we develop. I think, as I say these words, of that speech that J.D. Vance gave in Munich back at the beginning of the current US administration, a strange speech for many reasons, but one of them was the extent to which he called on Europe to rediscover values. Well, hey, we didn't lose our values, but our values were not the values that he was pronouncing. He was pronouncing values of things like some absolute freedom to say whatever you like, regardless of what you say and who you hurt, in the context of the oversight of digital services and platforms and so forth. But that's not the freedom of speech that we know. We know the freedom that was carefully crafted in the light of the horrors of the Second World War, where the danger of absolute speech was very clearly understood. And I'd like to also come back to the issues of the Sahel and so forth in terms of Europe's actions. Again, my focus, my mandate is within the 46 member states of the Council of Europe. And the link to what you said is that we have to get much more serious about migration. Migration is not going to stop. Migratory flows are as old as history, and they will continue as long as history. And we have to go beyond sticking plaster approaches or just lock up our borders approaches. We have to have much more sophisticated engagement with a human reality that has shaped all of us, by the way. If we all did DNA testing in this room, we would have a very diverse set of origins for each one of us as individuals. But there are things we need to do. We need to have safe and legal pathways into Europe. We need to have humanitarian pathways into Europe. We need to be much more aware of the need to protect human dignity. I'm not, by the way, advocating open borders. It's not some kind of a free-for-all that I'm championing, but rather a more long-term perception of what a human rights-based approach to our borders and to migration, and indeed to the needs of our society. I was visiting a country literally yesterday where they can't begin to find enough workers, either in that country or elsewhere in Europe. And so they're required to establish these safe and legal pathways. We should all be looking at exactly the same, including in the context of the demographics.
Okay, thank you. So I will now turn to the role of norms in conflicts and go a little deeper. And I'll start now with Michael. So I wanted to ask you how you see the role and the limitations of international humanitarian law and human rights frameworks in today's conflicts, focusing in particular on Ukraine, and what you think the challenges are, the particular challenges raised by Russia's invasion of Ukraine for the protection of civilians.
Well, first, the challenges on the part of Russia's behavior. Just read the UN reports. The UN has an excellent team on the ground that's producing periodic reports on what's going on, and it is truly chilling in terms of what they are telling us about Russia's behavior in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, in terms of the people taken back to Russia, including as yet we can't verify the number of children who've been taken, the summary executions, the targeting of civilians, absolutely, there are people here from Ukraine. I don't want to talk about your lived reality on your behalf, but it must be so exhausting, these attacks on civilians night in, night out, for such a long period now. These are brutal attacks on human dignity and therefore on human rights. And then the question arises, but what point law if it can't stop this stuff? You could make an argument that, that law is discredited, but I would ask us to approach this with great care. It's not the law that's discredited, it is the application of the law that's failing. And we must continue to use the prism of humanitarian law, and I'll come back to humanitarian in a moment, but the prism of these bodies of law at all times. Why? The first is that provides the context for accountability. We have to determine what violations of law are being perpetrated in order to hold people and states and institutions accountable for those actions. Now, that may not come now, may not come tomorrow. Justice can be a long time in coming, but that is no... I mean, I was gathering data. I set up the Human Rights Monitoring Operation in Bosnia, the UN one, in Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1993. We were gathering data all the time, constantly, and we didn't really know why. We didn't know there was going to be a tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. The same in Sierra Leone, where I worked later. We didn't know there was going to be a special court. But hey, when these bodies were established, where did they go for evidence? They went to our reports. And our reports were generated by and based on law. The second thing is, we have to do justice not just against perpetrators, but for victims. And we need a frame of reference there as well, to map the impact on human well-being and dignity of the atrocities that are perpetrated. And applying a human rights prism there is absolutely essential. And then the third, which is my big focus at the moment, is that we have to embed human rights in the pathway to peace for Ukraine. I'm watching the Ukraine peace initiatives with a certain amount of bemusement. I'm learning about them from the media, and it seems to be some kind of reversion to great power negotiation outside all of those multilateral spaces that we so carefully constructed. And the result of that is, it's about transactions. It's not about people. I don't hear any references in what I'm reading to the well-being of civilians in occupied territories, to the return of the children, to putting human rights, putting human dignity, and therefore human rights at the heart of a pathway to reconstruction. My list goes on, including in terms of the return of IDPs and refugees. But human rights is it's our language to deliver respect for human dignity. And that remains as relevant now as ever, notwithstanding the atrocious disregard. One little thing on humanitarian law, and then I'll stop. I'm not a humanitarian lawyer, I'm a human rights lawyer. But I must say, it's worrying for me that somehow Putin can attack a military installation and it's considered a legitimate target, even in a war of aggression, under what I understand to be humanitarian law. It's an entirely provoked, aggressive act by that state. And somehow the current humanitarian law seems to give a space for that to be tolerated. Not all acts, of course. But I'd ask those, including those in the room who are specialists in humanitarian law, once this horror is behind us, to see if there is a need for a reform of the norms in that regard.
Thank you, Michael. So I want to broaden this out, Comfort. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about peace operations, how we should think about the future of peacekeeping, especially with the budget cuts that have been announced now or that are in the pipeline, it seems, for the United Nations. What future do you see for peacekeeping? And I'm thinking here in particular of the centrality of the POC mandate, the protection of civilians mandate, that has become sort of what we associate peacekeeping with. How do you see peacekeeping evolving in the next few years?
Yeah, just before I answer that question, I want to pick up something that you said about sort of what lessons and reflections the lawyers, especially those who work on IHL, think about. Last week, the UN's humanitarian relief chief, Tom Fletcher, gave what I thought was a significant statement to the Security Council. You could have said that in '95, you could have said that in '94, you could have said it in 2001, 2010 and 2015, a reminder to the international community, to the Chamber of International Peace and Security, that on your watch, these kind of atrocities are happening as well. And so as much as we ascribe lessons to lawyers, it's in that room, it's in that chamber that the change needs to happen. And it connects to what your question is. It's about the politics. If you have the political will, a number of these issues that we're talking about I'm not saying there is a silver bullet, I'm not saying there's a magic bullet, But really, it does come down to the primacy of politics, and the ability of that chamber and key leaders themselves. And the reason I say this is because on the eve of President Trump coming to power, we managed to get through. He managed to get through a ceasefire. Now you can look to see what the background that led to that. But here was a leader about to take the helm, and the pressure that he applied, both and the messaging he gave to Hamas, but also the pressure he applied to the Israelis is also what drove us towards that ceasefire. And the question is how we get back to that as well. So as much as we are going to ask lawyers to reflect about IHL, I also think that the politicians are also the key to unlocking a lot of these dilemmas as well. I don't want to say that there's the time of peacekeeping is dead. I don't want to say peacekeeping operations, but we're at a moment now where the UN has to do less for less. The message has been sent to the UN. There isn't that kind of money to do these kind of massive peacekeeping operations. The UN has got a liquidation crisis, a crisis that was there before the 20th of January. This is a real testing time. The UN has to think through about how it streamlines, how it deals with the overlap of mandates and missions, and then how it begins to make sure that its secretariat is lean and mean to deal with the realities of today. So that is already quite a seismic sort of reflection that the UN has to do. At the same time, there is the question about the legitimacy of UN peacekeeping going forward, because it's only in the last 18 months. We saw Mali shut down, we saw Sudan shut down, and now we're seeing the missions in the Democratic Republic of Congo also shutting down. And then the protection of civilians, it's a political issue. You cannot expect humanitarian agencies, you cannot expect UN peacekeepers to solve the issue of protection of civilians if the Security Council is not willing to use its mandate, its political mandate, to shore up those peacekeeping operations. You cannot expect blue helmets to answer that political question as well. So the assumption that a humanitarian stick is going to be able to deliver that peace dividend is a falsehood as well. It really does boil down to the chamber of the Security Council, making sure that when it sets up these missions, when it sets up these mandates, when it designs these resolutions, it backs them up with a proper political stick. Otherwise, you're going to continue to see civilians at the mercy of a lot of these militias. Your point at the very beginning, Michael, to your question about what is worrying us, the three things that are worrying me today as an organization 30 years on: the norm of non-aggression, the fact that we are living in an age of mass violations against civilians as well, and that the checks and balances that would often control and act as constraints, all of those things are about to walk out the door. And it's not clear to me how you begin to salvage those issues today. That, I think, is a real big indictment on where we are. And we are at an inflection point, and it's a dangerous moment as well. And we are on the verge of losing all these issues that you have worked very hard to protect as well.
So, Comfort, I think that offers a good segue to the next theme, which is geopolitics and how we should think about the role of great power competition in resolving today's conflicts or influencing today's conflicts. And I wanted to ask you how you see the future of peace negotiations in Ukraine. And here, I'm thinking in particular of what you just mentioned, the norm against territorial conquest that seems to be eroding. I think people look at these negotiations, and from a Ukrainian perspective, I don't want to speak on behalf of Ukrainians, but I think it's well known that there is skepticism about the way in which the negotiations are being done. So how should we think about this?
I think this was going to be the year of some kind of negotiation. The question is how it was going to happen. And we're not Pollyanna-ish about this, whether it started with Trump and talking to Putin, or any other way, we were very clear that Ukraine had to be at the table. We were also very clear that this was also not just about Ukraine, but it was also about Europe's future security, and therefore Europe had to be at the table as well. I think there's one fact that hasn't changed, even if the Trump administration has recalibrated itself from the initial fiasco that we saw in February, and sort of the heavy hand and pressure that Trump has put on Zelensky. And even though he's changed and tilted his own position, said that he's frustrated and irritated, it's very clear that he wants a pause, he wants a ceasefire, and he also wants to shift diplomacy to Russia and to Ukraine and to Europe, and to pivot to Asia as well. Now, of course, the notion that I could deliver a deal within my first day, that's gone out of the window. I think the realities of election campaigning and then governance are two different realities as well. So we're seeing the hard grind and slog as well. We gained nothing from. It's not clear to me what we gained last week from the talk that President Trump had with Putin, except he spoke to Zelensky before and he spoke to Zelensky after. And I think that sent an important message also. The other important message for me also is that Europe has come out of this also in a very strong manner. The last 4 months may have looked very hairy, very worrying for Europe, very nerve-wracking for Ukraine. But we have an E4 country, the UK, France, Germany, and Poland, who, together with this coalition of the willing, have both managed to also craft a very strong diplomacy for Europe. Europe looks stronger at stepping up to the plate and beginning to show that it's able to put certain facts on the table in a way that I think the Americans themselves are beginning to see that, look, Europe has stepped up to the plate. Does that change the facts in terms of Putin's side? The demands are still there. He's not interested in a ceasefire. He's not interested in a negotiation. He still wants a pliant Ukraine. He still wants a Ukraine that doesn't have the capability to defend itself. And I think Europe has to continue to be clear about what those security guarantees look like in terms of a strong Ukrainian force, a strong Ukrainian defense mechanism, and a very strong defense industry from the European side. But what I suspect is more protraction down the line, more stalemate, and a Putin that is not really interested in negotiations in the way that President Trump was projecting as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm mindful of the time. So, Michael, if you want to jump in on this, you mentioned already how human rights seem not to be part of the conversation in these peace negotiations. So if you want to maybe comment a little bit on that, and then if I could ask you about the special tribunal for the crime of aggression and the role of institutions in addressing accountability.
Sure, but look, first in terms of Europe stepping up to the plate, it has to be acknowledged that it has been the most generous donor to Ukraine throughout. I believe bigger than the United States, if I stand corrected, but that's my belief. Secondly, the hosting of millions of Ukrainians across Europe has been an act of solidarity of in modern times, unprecedented nature, and I think particularly of Poland in terms of the sheer generosity with which people were welcomed. So yes, I agree with the political analysis, but let's not forget the preceding steps, which were important. I just want to say briefly, if I say human rights is in a...
Just to be clear, I'm not questioning what Europe has done until
and I'm not
I should also say that for a conflict prevention organization to lean in heavily on the idea of militarization, it shows you how forward-leaning that we are. So I don't want to give an impression that we don't see anything else but the defense of Ukraine as well.
No, I fully understand. I wasn't contradicting you either. You know, for many people in this room who aren't embedded in human rights work, saying I need to get human rights, we need to get human rights into the heart of the peace pathway mightn't sound like much at all. So I prefer to say we need to get the honouring of human dignity into the heart of the pathway to peace. And the roadmap for human dignity is human rights. So it comes in that context. And I've said it already, I won't repeat myself. But I'll just give one dimension I didn't mention earlier, which is we need women in the pathway to peace. The UN championed Security Council Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security, a reminder of how much we've learned and how much better peace outcomes are when women are involved. And again, there's no structured way to embed that right now because there's no structured multilateral space within which the peace is being built. So I'll leave it on that point. But did you already ask me about the special tribunal? Or?
Yes, if you could maybe...
Yes, yeah. I must say I'm impressed by the work the Council of Europe has been doing in this area. I'm new to the Council of Europe, just a year. And so this work was well underway before I got there. But it is playing a leading role in terms of delivering criminal accountability for atrocities perpetrated against the people of Ukraine. Most recently, with the authorization from the government of Ukraine to go ahead with the establishment of the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression. In other words, a tribunal capable of trying individuals in leadership roles in Russia responsible for the perpetration of the atrocities. It's receiving a lot of support. Something like 40 countries are supporting the preparation for the development of the tribunal. It'll be based in The Hague. It'll work in a very complementary fashion to the International Criminal Court. Its work will be slow. It'll only ever deal with a very small number of prosecutions. It'll have to tackle the issue of immunities for the very highest officials, but give time until people step out of office. That's one of the ways to deal with the immunities. It will be able to try people in absentia, which was a huge preoccupation. How do we get our hands on these people? And I think it's very important because it is essential to have personalized, individualized accountability for grave crimes if we're to have serious deterrent effect going into the future. Last thing, this work for a tribunal has to be understood side by side with other work being led by the Council of Europe on compensation for material damage, for personal injury and material damage. And that work is very far advanced now, but we face the hurdle at this point of determining where the resources will come from to deliver the compensation to impacted individuals. But nevertheless, we're further advanced, I would say, at this stage in this horrific cycle of violence than would have been the case in previous analogous conflicts.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to take this opportunity also to ask Comfort a question. So of course, Europe has united behind Ukraine, and the Special Tribunal for Aggression is a good example of that. But of course, when it comes to specifically this initiative, there has been a reluctance on the part of some states outside of Europe to join this quest for accountability, whether it be before the Special Tribunal or before the International Criminal Court. And so I wanted to ask you, Comfort, why you think certain states, even though they don't necessarily condone Russia's behavior in Ukraine, are reluctant to throw their support behind initiatives like the Special Tribunal or International Criminal Court investigations.
Well, there are some in the Western sphere also that don't, that have not signed up to the ICC as well. So it's not just non-Western countries as well. So I think it's important to recognise that. I think it goes back to what we were saying about institutions or double standards, or might is right as well. And it's not necessarily that people or states challenge this, but they also see the unevenness of the application of these laws and of these norms, that the rule makers are also the rule breakers as well. You see it domestically and internationally as well. So I wouldn't want to set it up as though there are groups of states who do not want to subscribe to these international architectures or structures, but some of them question the premise in which they were created, and some of them wonder whether what some of them label as judicial imperialism is only for them and will never go after some of the and those who were the architects of this as well. So there was always a question mark about the uneven application of this, and we saw it on the African continent, for example, and we saw it also in dealing with an even hand on a number of the Middle East files. So I would want to sort of reframe how these instruments are used as well. I worked. I was in Sierra Leone. I'm not working for the special court. I was with Crisis Group then, but I was at the UN when Charles Taylor was eventually brought from exile in Nigeria back to Liberia and then taken to the Special Tribunal for Sierra Leone. And I will say it openly, it's on paper. Crisis Group was looking for a formula, and this is not in hindsight, this is what we were thinking at the time. Crisis Group was looking at a formula that allowed us to address the necessary peace that was needed in Liberia and Sierra Leone while dealing with the issue of the accountability that Charles Taylor needed to attend to. And he asked me whether I, Comfort Aero, at the time West Africa Project Director, was calling for him to go to the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And I said yes, so that you can have a fair day in court to answer the allegations that were being made against you. We were accused, when we advocated, or when we said that for the sake of peace, that he should go to exile in Nigeria, we were accused of dancing on the graves of tens and thousands of Sierra Leoneans. No, we advocated a message that we ensured that the door of justice was kept open. We made sure that we kept the door open to justice, so that 6 or 7 years later, I couldn't put a time on it, but eventually Nigeria released him and brought him back to Liberia based on the negotiation of two countries, the political negotiation that took place between Liberia and Nigeria. And Nigeria was very clear that when a democratic government was installed in Liberia and requested for Charles Taylor to be brought back to Liberia, that they would do that as well. And Liberia, as a sovereign country, said that it didn't want Charles Taylor to stay in Liberia, but that he was to be handed immediately over to the Special Court and then taken to The Hague. That was how justice was working. Now, the aftermath of that was that nobody ever believed the soft landing approach after that. So when it came to dealing with Omar al-Bashir, when it came to do with Mugabe, when it came to do with Gbagbo and all those things, they always cited what happened in Liberia as the case, as an example of why they don't trust these machineries. But when it works, it can work. I get worried about the special tribunal. I understand the intention as well, but we've got to be careful that while we're trying to negotiate a political process, while I understand that the need for accountability, that the timing in which we deploy it doesn't undermine the ability to negotiate. But I understand the intention of what is being applied in the situation that you're trying to pursue vis-a-vis holding the highest people accountable for what has happened in the war aggression against Ukraine.
Could I jump in on that, because it's very personal? I gave evidence in the Charles Taylor trial. I know,
that's why I told the story.
For 2 days, I was in the witness box, 2 meters away from Charles Taylor, and it's among the two most unforgettable days of my life, because I was able to tell all those stories of all those innocent men, women and children who had suffered such unbelievable barbarity somehow under the behest of forces sponsored and empowered by him. I still consider that the day that man was sentenced and sent to jail, where he still is, was a day where in some way justice was done for a barbarity, on the basis of which then a more solid peace could emerge in Sierra Leone. And I remain very strongly of that view. I also, and forgive me, you might think we're going off on a tangent, but you'll remember back in the day in Sierra Leone, there was endless debate, was peace or justice. And I never felt that that was a fake choice. It isn't about peace or justice. It's about finding a way to integrate peace and justice in a context-specific one that doesn't undermine the peace or the justice. And that's going to look very different in different places.
Okay, so we only have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up to questions in just a moment. If people could already raise their hands so I see how many questions we have. Okay, so before I do that, just one final question to both speakers. So I wanted to ask you what you think we could do in this moment to strengthen respect for international norms and institutions, and whether you see any emerging coalitions that may push this, this issue forward. So I'm thinking here of maybe the BRICS as an alternative that might provide an alternative in this tense moment. So if you could share your thoughts on that. Maybe who wants to go first?
Yeah, indeed, some elements of how we could strengthen the current system have already been identified. I think very, very powerfully. Your one about political will, because you're absolutely right. If you don't have the political will, these things are not going to work. And so obviously political will it remains the starting and the ending point. But beyond that, we have to resource them adequately. Take human rights. Everybody says how important human rights is, but when you look at it as a proportion of the investment in the relevant organizations, it's minuscule. You know, it's 1/3 of the three-legged stool of the United Nations, but the leg of the stool is that length compared to the proper leg of the other two branches. It's no different in the Council of Europe. So states are not willing to give the resources to demonstrate that they're taking adequately that very important institutional function. I spoke earlier about building up an awareness of and a belief in the value of multilateralism. At exactly the moment when it's in greatest danger, we have to do a much better job of selling why it is irreplaceably important, and we're at exactly that moment. And of course, the institutions themselves, the UN is going through this radical restructuring exercise right now. I'm not competent to speak to it, but all such organizations across the world should look very hard at themselves right now and ask, how could we do our job better? What are we doing that we don't need to do anymore? What do we need to do much more of? Things of that nature. And then you mentioned alliances. It's not quite the multilateral organization context, but I'm very heartened and hope-filled by the way young people are driving agendas in our societies. It's some of the greatest social change of recent years, at least in Europe, has been driven by, or is being driven by, young people. Much of the outrage about the climate is a young person-driven movement. Look at the importance of the protests, the peaceful protests on the streets of many European cities right now, and the extent to which they are gathering together all of the unhappiness, all of the unease, all of the demand for better alternatives. Again, it's young people. Black Lives Matter, young people. Now, I'm not deifying young people. I'm not saying somehow that they're the magic solution to everything. I'm just saying there's an amazing resource there with which those of us who are not young people should be in accompaniment and in support, helping them to formulate the political agenda beyond the cry of outrage, and seeing how their decent calls can be embedded in our decision making. The other, just to say, to make clear that I'm not naive, I'm also not blind to the extent to which young people can be radicalized. And we know that young men, in particular, are exposed to all manner of risk of extremist thought and thinking. It's a huge debate. It's kind of beyond the scope today. It's about tackling disinformation. It's about empowering people, making them feel valued in society. But that the fact that some young people get it wrong should in no way discredit the vast potential of young people, not in the future, but right now, to save our world.
Comfort, just very briefly. Okay.
I don't need to say anything because you have people who have
their hands up.
So thank you.
Let's take the question. I saw one question right here in the front.
Okay, thank you. Szymon Zaręba, I'm head of the program on international law and global economy at PISM. Just a short two-phrase comment to what Michael said as regards the Claims Commission. I believe a source for of the money for just compensation for the victims and for the possible damages could be the frozen Russian assets frozen in 2022. Well, but coming to the question, well, probably it will be directed to Comfort because, well, Michael said that, well, he does not deal with the international humanitarian law. My question is, you know, taking into account the topic of this particular panel is that, well, if we think about the laws of conflict, well, with regard to the Middle East and Ukraine, I believe one of the issues which comes into mind is the use, well, the increased use of the artificial intelligence during the military conflicts, right? And I would like to ask you, do you believe the current existing international legal framework is enough, well, to regulate the use of the AI, well, and the possible consequences as regards, for example, the humanitarian law violations, or not? Do you think there should be some other regulations being put in place in the future? Thank you.
That's a good question. And right behind you is my colleague right at the back, Steve Pomper, who's probably in a better position to answer this question about, you know, the sort of the regulatory frameworks around sort of use of certain technologies. So if you don't mind, I'm going to defer and ask Steve, put Steve on the spot to see if he can answer that. So Steve is the Chief of Policy, but also an international lawyer as well for Crisis Group.
So that really is being put on the spot. The answer is probably not, I would say. Obviously, you know, it's a set of technologies that just doesn't have a dedicated body of law committed to it. And you can imagine all kinds of scenarios that simply can't be met when you don't necessarily have a person in the loop to make decisions about targeting and things like that. The problem that we face is that there's, I don't think, any realistic path right now to building some kind of addendum to another protocol to the Geneva Conventions or a new body of law that would have the kind of universality of the Geneva Conventions. So I suspect that this is going to be a body of law like others where we have to extrapolate, reason by analogy, and use the principles that are already out there to try and shape, you know, codes, at least among like-minded countries, for how they behave.
Outside of the conflict context, there is a worrying regulatory gap when it comes to AI in the security and defense context. They're excluded from the AI Act of the EU. They're excluded from the Global Framework Convention on AI of the Council of Europe. And we do need, again, I'm not competent to speak to the conflict context and the IHL context, but we do need instruments in this space. Their exclusion was understandable from the general negotiation of the generic instruments of recent times, but it leaves an issue that is still to be tackled and addressed.
Okay, so we have 1 minute left, so please ask your question.
Rafał Tarnogórski, the Polish Institute of International Affairs. I want to follow up that question because, frankly speaking, I wanted to ask, especially Commissioner O'Flaherty, because you've mentioned general artificial intelligence and even super general intelligence. Whether you perceive this as a threat or an opportunity, but in the context of protection of human rights. If I understood correctly, the general or super general intelligence, that means that would be an entity, self-conscious, trespassing us as a humans in many capacities. What does it mean for the protection of human rights, or for us?
What does it mean for human identity? Never mind human rights. These are exactly the discussions we need to have. I don't have a magic response on that. All I'm asking is that we talk about it. We have to sit down again. We did all the AI discussions 5-6 years ago, the ethics and the human rights and AI discussions. We have to have them again. The technology has gone so fast that I don't have the answer, but I'm searching for it.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we'll wrap up there. A big round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you, to our panelists for this fascinating discussion. Patryk, could you please come over, join us for a quick recap? So I wanted to ask you, could you please share with us your main takeaways from this panel, from this discussion?
Well, I think one of the main takeaways here is that we are definitely in a pivotal moment. There's a lot of tension, many conflicts, overlapping conflicts that are forcing us to ask new questions, questions that we have not necessarily grappled with. One example that I think came up is this issue of peace negotiations in Ukraine. So if the norm against territorial acquisition is eroding, as it seems to be, increasingly states are openly talking about just taking territory from other states. One example that didn't come up is the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda's attempts also to potentially take territory there. Increasingly, it just seems that states are open to things that we thought were unthinkable until very recently. And so I think this raises new questions for peace negotiators in Ukraine, but more generally for us, so people involved in peace and security. How should we think about these questions, and what impact can we really have when it seems that there's just a group of states and a group of powerful actors who seem to be setting the script?
So if I may continue, what should our policymakers and strategies walk away with from this panel?
Well, I think there was definitely a belief in multilateralism and institutions. They may not be perfect, as we heard. There are various problems that I think we want to acknowledge and we want to discuss openly. But at the end of the day, we don't necessarily have better alternatives. And maybe reforming the institutions that we have right now is a better way forward than some more radical ideas that are out there. So I think it's working within the system and trying to build coalitions, look for people who are of a similar persuasion, and finding a way to build these coalitions.
Thank you, Patryk. Thank you for the